Hey everyone, this is T-Lore, and this week I'm back with some more combo videos. So today I'm going to be looking at teleportation and how helpful that can be in game. So there's a couple of different ways that you can teleport, and there's actually a ship that I'm not going to be covering, and that's going to be a Sea Dragon, because those are a little bit different in how they work with being sea monsters, and they're very much tied to that specific ship and not being able to carry crew. So those have to be given actions from another ship, and they're very limited in their capability because of that. However, they can teleport instantly anywhere they want to go. So that's the gold standard for teleportation. However, there are two other options for teleporting, and there is Calypso, who lets you use whirlpools. Now, you can have whirlpools as terrain to start the game with that you can use. However, she allows you to place one L away from your ship and then L away from a wild island. So that allows you to instantly go from one location to the other of your choosing. The other one that we can look at are fog bank jumpers, or if this ship ends a turn in a fog bank, on her next turn she may use her move action to move out of any other fog bank in play. So this can be comboed with a smoke pot specialist to allow you to choose where you want to enter and exit. However, we're going to be assuming that the terrain for this is in an ideal location, because it gets pretty complicated very quickly if you're trying to assume that you have a smoke pot, because that means you already have a ship there to place the smoke pot specialist that you're moving out, or you hope that there's a fog bank where you're wanting to go. So we'll just go ahead and assume that. And we're going to be comparing that to a pretty regular ship. Now, this is a little bit faster than average with S plus L. But if we're aiming for speed, then this is what we're going to want to look for. So to start out with, let's look at speed. So we have L length right here and S length right here. What are some numerical values that we can compare this to? So if we look at an S, that's about 58 millimeters, or 2¼ inches. If we look at L, this is about 84 millimeters, or 3¼ inches. So if we use those lengths and we look at the rules for how the game starts, wild islands are going to be anywhere from 3 to 6L apart, which ends up being about 250 to 500 millimeters apart. If we look at HMS Oxford, we're going to go ahead and put a helmsman on there, because that's a pretty easy standard thing to do to get extra speed. We're going to put some way to get an extra action on there, and in this case we're going to use the same action twice, and we're going to put a re-roller on here to make sure that we get that same action twice more often. So this ship right now is 12 points plus 5 for crew, and since it has 4 cargo, with this 0-point crew linking, we're going to end up with 2 extra cargo on here. So that means that we have 2 cargo spaces left over for treasure. We've got good cannons for combat, so this would be a pretty decent starting point for a ship. So you could throw a captain on there for extra combat, throw an explorer on there to explore an island. However you want to use that ship is not important. This really just gets us our speed, which means you have S plus L plus S on your turn. And if you look at how long that is, that adds up to be exactly 200 millimeters. Okay, so 200 millimeters per action. And if we look at the statistics of a same action twice plus a re-roller, you're going to get somewhere in the 80% chance range of getting an extra action in 2 turns. So that means our standard here is in 2 turns we're going to get 3 actions most of the time with this, which will get us to 600 millimeters. Now remember, 600 millimeters is much larger than 500 millimeters, which is the furthest away you can put a wild island. So this can get to a wild island in 2 turns, almost guaranteed. If not, it's going to be really close. So let's compare that now to Calypso. Calypso forces you, once it's revealed, at the beginning of your turn, roll a d6, and on a 4 through 6, instead of giving this ship an action, choose 2 whirlpools and place them. So on your first turn, if you reveal Calypso, now you're going to have a 50% chance unless you use a re-roller, and then that goes up to about a 75% chance of placing your whirlpools. And that's your action. If you get a same action twice, it doesn't do anything. If you look at the Pirates Code, that same action twice doesn't do anything. So that means that you have to either spend 5 or 6 points or have some sacrifice captain, or you're spending a few more points already to give yourself an extra action that you can use to go ahead and move. So on your first turn, let's assume that you've got your good roll, your 75% chance with a re-roller of getting this ability to go off. You have some way to get an extra action. Notice already we're making a lot of concessions to make this work. Now you get to go through the wormhole you just created and pop out at the other end. So this is pretty good because it allows you to place them pretty much wherever you want to. However, it does need to be L away from a wild island, so it could be the furthest one from you or whatever you want to, and it can neither can be placed so that it touches any island or ship. You also don't have to roll for the effect with a whirlpool. So this works pretty well. However, you're going to be fighting this ability that forces you to roll at the beginning of each of your turns. So when you get there, you're still going to be trying to roll out of generating more whirlpools unless you sacrifice Calypso and just hope you do decently in a whirlpool. So this does make it pretty risky because you're having to roll every turn and hope that you don't lose your action to generating more whirlpools when you don't want them. But this is also very flexible because it's a crew and it's a pirate crew. You're able to put this on a lot of different ships. So that allows you to put it on a large 10-masted gunship or something like that. So if your play space is pretty large, especially if all of your islands are in the 6L range apart, Calypso is going to be really powerful to be able to move around the board. But you have got to make sure that you have some way of rolling out of whirlpools when you don't want them, or some way of sacrificing Calypso and dealing with the rolling for whirlpools when you go through them. So this is something to keep in mind, but Calypso is a great way to get some map control. Also realize though, however, these whirlpools then allow your opponents to also go through them. So this does have that significant drawback. All right, so we've looked at Calypso. Now let's look at the other one, which would be a Fogbank Jumper. So I've got a couple of them here. There's only 6 in the game, which is part of the problem. One of them is a super rare from Davy Jones' Curse, and the other ones are limited edition from Davy Jones' Curse. So those are really hard to obtain. The rest of these are an uncommon and 2 commons. So looking at Hangman's Joke, it's got decent cannons. Speed doesn't really matter because we're teleporting, and 4 cargo. So this is probably the best one. Needle is really slow. At some point, S is not enough movement. And it only has 2 cargo. So for 1 more point, you get 2 more cargo, better guns, better speed. So I would rather have Hangman's Joke than Needle on this one. And then Sea Hag is 15 points, and it has 3 cargo and L speed. The cannons are not a big deal. So this is really kind of your options that you have for easily obtainable Fogbank Jumpers. None of them are outstanding. They're okay, but once you get out of the Fogbank, you don't have a lot of speed to work with to get somewhere else, nor do you have a lot of cargo. So that's a little bit of a drawback as well. You'll also notice this is 11 points, and for that same amount, I can pick up HMS Oxford, which has more mass, speed, better guns, and the same amount of cargo. So that's a big trade-off. And how does this compare? Well, if you've got fog banks where you want to have them, on your first turn, you're assuming that you can get into a fog bank that's near your home island and enter that fog bank. So whether or not you have an extra action, it doesn't matter. You have to end your turn in the fog bank. So if you put a helmsman on there, do 2 actions, it really doesn't matter as long as you end your turn in the fog bank. You could move 12S and it doesn't matter. You have to end your turn in the fog bank. So once you get to that fog bank, the next turn you can use your move action to move out of any other fog bank in play. Now, you do have to roll for the fog bank, and fog banks have 1 through 6 printed on the outside, so you could end up in an orientation that's opposite from the direction you really want to go, and then you're having to use your really slow movement to compensate for that, or extra move actions to really get there. So if you're doing fog banks on turn 1, you're entering it, and on turn 2, you're exiting and then moving. However, that is in a randomly generated direction. I would say if you have a reroller on there, you could potentially use that. However, it could be a pretty tricky reroll. If your orientation is like not the opposite, let's say that it's maybe 3 o'clock from where you wanted to go, that may not be something you want to reroll, because then you could get an even worse orientation. It's not like a same action twice where you miss it and you roll again and you hit the window. This could be, you can get worse or you can get better. And the last comment that I'll have is that if you are using smoke pot specialists and you're placing those out there, it could be a way to get it home quickly or to put out another fog bank, but you're committing an awful lot of points when you could just go ahead and commit those to something that's a lot more flexible. So with being able to get on average about 200 to 300 millimeters of movement with this, which is going to cover probably a quarter to a third of the play area. So this really is, unless you're playing with a really large play area, teleporting is just not as practical. The ships are more expensive. They're really very limited. So this is a very limited selection of ships and what you can do with them. And they're pretty expensive as well. So if you're going to go for teleporting, it's probably a lot more feasible to use Calypso, because you put Calypso on and you can teleport. You throw a reroller on, that has other applications as well. So I would rank these as build for speed. Those points are going to serve you better at all points in the game. Go with Calypso. It can make for some interesting strategies, being able to get early map control. And then occasionally you might see a fog bank jumper, but this is really going to be more beneficial on something like Hangman's Joke as a treasure runner. It's going to be tough to make this useful on a ship that's being used as a gunship, because then they just avoid fog banks or move out of range of the fog bank. So I could certainly see it being useful, but I would rather spend my points on making a ship that much faster and more useful in the game.